On Friday, February 7th, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops observes National Marriage Week, an effort to promote marriage, family, and a culture of life. The USCCB offers free resources to help celebrate the sacrament and gift of marriage. They include preaching aids for priests and daily reflections for couples to meditate on during the week. Brad Wilcox, a professor of sociology and director of the National Marriage Project at the University of Virginia, joins the show to discuss the benefits of marriage and having children. He is also the author of Get Married: Why Americans Must Defy the Elites, Forge Strong Families, and Save Civilization. Brad, thanks for being on the show again. The marriage.
Good to be with you, Abby.
Great to have you. Marriage rates are down. So remind us again, what are the benefits of marriage on the couple and on society?
Yeah, Abby, well, the great marriage paradox in our day is that the marriage rates have come down in recent years. Yet what we see in the data, the science, is that the connection between marriage and adult happiness, for instance, and flourishing kids as well, that connection couldn't be stronger. So we see for both women and men, they're almost twice likely to be very happy when they're married. And we see that kids who are being raised in stably married families are way more likely to go to college and much less likely to go to prison or jail, for instance, than their peers who are in, some other kind of non-intact family. So again, the science is kind of telling us that marriage matters, and in some ways matters more than ever, even as it's lost ground in recent decades.
Indeed. Researchers from the Ontario-based think tank Cardis say that declining marriage rates play a role in the drop in fertility rates. And a number of countries, including the U.S., Canada, and nearly all of Western Europe, are beneath the replacement rate necessary to keep a population stable. Brad, are there any solutions to fix this?
I think one of the things that we can do, Abby, is to kind of pursue an effort to end the marriage penalties that are embedded in many of our programs, like Medicaid, for instance. These programs discourage marriage, and that's one kind of impediment facing families. I think another policy objective we need to be focusing on is figuring out ways to make affordable single-family housing, more readily accessible to working middle-class families. And we hope the Trump administration will be pursuing measures like opening up federal land for development that would increase the supply of affordable single-family homes for ordinary families across the U.S. That would help, I think, create a more family-friendly context for young adults to kind of go forward with plans to have kids.
Cardis also found that people are waiting longer to get married and have their first child. In a world that sometimes tells young adults they're not ready to get married and start a family, are there ways to counter that messaging so young people get married and have children earlier?
I think it's important for young adults to realize sometimes the thing about being sort of single, footloose, and fancy-free is kind of living their best lives in their 20s. The data tell us that 20-somethings who are married are happier, they're less depressed, they're less likely to be abusing alcohol and drugs. And so there's just no question that 20-somethings who are married are more likely to be flourishing. I think surprisingly, I'll see that 20-somethings who get married kind of in their mid-20s, broadly defined, are also more likely to say that they're happily married later in life. So the idea here is to kind of not to think you need to be 30 before you put a ring on it. It's certainly worth, that idea is worth circulating in our culture today.
Yes. And many countries are offering housing subsidies, baby bonuses, and baby allowances to combat the falling birth rates in their countries. Do you believe this is a helpful solution?
It's part of the answer. It's clear that we have to do more, I think, to make family life affordable and family life more attractive financially for young adults across the country. But it's also the case we need to do more to, I think, kind of tell the true story about the value of both marriage and parenthood. So more young adults want to enter into marriage and want to go ahead and start their families. They're often kind of fed the lie that kind of career is the most important thing. We know empirically that a good marriage is a much better predictor, Abby, of your happiness than a good job. And of course, many Americans don't have great jobs. So I think recognizing that sort of focusing on love and marriage and family is a more kind of important and often viable route for forging a meaningful and happy life, for Americans across the country than kind of prioritizing work, over everything else.
I think you're exactly right, Brad. Now, what are your thoughts on Vice President J.D. Vance's outlook on the family? And do you expect more pro-family policies coming out of this administration?
Yes, well, Vice President Vance, last week at the March on Life or March for Life kind of articulated his commitment to kind of advancing policies that make family life more affordable for Americans across the country. I think that's a key priority for him. And we're already seeing new efforts with Secretary Duffy, for instance, just recently announcing a policy that's going to be steering transportation dollars towards communities with more marriage and more childbearing. So I think we're going to see a lot of new efforts in this administration on the part of people like Secretary Duffy to think about how they can kind of basically reform federal policy and regulatory policy in ways that do make it more family friendly. So I do expect some new measures both from the vice president and from the president's team more generally in the days and months ahead.
And can you tell us, how much does the health department do to support families? And can you weigh in on RFK's hearing?
I don't have a perspective on Robert F. Kennedy. I didn't see the hearing, but HHS has been spending about $150 million every year just on marriage and fatherhood, and would be, in support of directing more of that money towards marriage, especially kind of making about $100 million of that amount of money that's being spent every year kind of focus more directly on helping people prepare for marriage and then also get support in their marriages once they are married as well. But thinking too about PSAs, HHS sponsors, they do a lot of PSAs, on things like football shows and basketball shows, and to kind of use those PSA dollars partly to support the value and importance of things like marriage and parenthood with the broader American population.
Brad Wilcox, thank you so much for your work and for your time.
Thank you, Abby.